Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hot with Saima, the podcast show for people searching for that courageous person within us who wants to be inspired by listening to stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm Saima Dhillon, your host. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. Without waiting anymore, let's dive right in. My guest this evening, Rosalin Krieger, is an empathetic, trauma informed, anti racist speaker, writer, English tutor, workshop facilitator, and painter who helps stuck, anxious, or traumatized people think and act with clarity, awareness, and conviction by examining their writing, self talk, and thinking. So, without waiting anymore, let me bring Roslyn on and we continue this conversation with Roslyn. Good evening, Roslyn. How are
Good
you
evening,
doing?
Saima. Lovely to be here.
It's a pleasure and honor to have you on my podcast. And the show is all about touching lives. It's about enriching other people's life, and I think other people. Um, it's part of the process, but it's really about enriching my life with the guests who come and they share their journeys and their journey, their experience, their stories with me, and each guest leaves me, more tolerant, more educated, not educated, but knowledgeable, and in a much better place. So, how about I give the stage to you and let you give us a more elaborate introduction about you?
Sure. Thank you, Saima. First of all, I want to thank Tim Sohn for making this possible. I think Saima saw me on one of Tim's many shows, and the last year has been quite transformational for me in that I have been able and willing to honestly talk about healing from developmental trauma or other types of trauma, and particularly talking about how trauma shapes your brain in ways that most of us are unprepared for or unaware for. And in my case, it really helped create a food addiction very early in my life because I really did not grow up in a culture, in a family culture, where one was able to have their emotions validated, seen to, and dealt with healthy. And I still struggle with that at the ripe age of 55. But as I was told recently by my trauma therapist, this is the last of the hurdles. And this month marks 2 years into this very difficult, but rewarding journey into dealing with trying to heal from, make sense of healing from trauma. And probably the biggest takeaway I want to leave today is that many people think when dealing with trauma, they look for some sort of logical reason, Saima. But the thing is that you have to connect with your body. And this is something very difficult. The irony is that connecting with your body is so difficult for those of us with trauma because trauma disconnects you from your body. And in my case, yeah, I just reacted to trauma by being so fearful of emotions, fearful of emotional pain, that that's what kind of fed the food addiction. So I'm still wrestling with that, getting better at it, but it's very challenging.
You said something just so amazingly powerful. You said that trauma makes us it detaches us from ourselves.
It does. That is the definition of trauma. And I didn't know, I kept doing that, but I didn't understand why. And then I did a series of artworks about 4 years ago with it was visual and written text. And I drew a picture of myself with decapitated. My head was over here, my body was down here. And I sent this to Dr. Oh God, Vanderkolk, who's the writer of The Body Keeps the Score, which is the text that everyone who is looking to see if they have trauma, if you want to know if you have trauma, you read The Body Keeps the Score. So I sent the picture to him when I used to be on Facebook, and he said, Rosalind, that is it.
Wow.
That's it.
Because
Yes,
mind is such a powerful tool. A mind, probably, mind has the ability to even heal you.
it does. I'll give you an example. One of the techniques that he mentions in The Body Keeps the Score, which has worked for me, has helped me process a lot of trauma in the form of reframing trauma. It's called EMDR. And it sounds kind of silly, but you follow your finger around, you stimulate the neurons right in the front here, frontal cortex, and you process a memory in the form of a snapshot. And your therapist, before you begin reframing, processing the trauma, asks you from series number of 1 to 7, how true is this, right? And then you have to say, okay, this I'm. So you're thinking about that picture, that trauma. You say, well, I hate that. Just for example, it feels horrible. Okay, we go back and forth. We think about it. She times it and then goes back and forth with her finger. You follow, you know, your therapist's fingers back and forth, side to side, and then she asks you again. So how are you feeling about this particular moment? And hopefully, it goes down to 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sometimes, of course, in my case, there was resistance, a lot of resistance. If you do any sort of parts work, you learn about terms like protectors and things like that. Uh, when trauma not only separates you, it also makes compartments. Each emotion that has never been validated, that has not been expressed, breaks off in your brain, and it kind of closes off until you go through therapy, trauma therapy, not psychoanalysis, by the way. That didn't work for me. Um,
What's the difference between the two, the trauma therapy and psychoanalysis?
Good question. Psychoanalysis is just talk therapy. There is no treatment. And there's no treatment with the body. Whereas, wonderfully, trauma treatment, EMDR, parts work, Fraser's table, you do also somatic work, which is with the body. And
What's
for me,
somatic work?
yeah, if I wouldn't have done any somatic work, if I wouldn't have done any trauma processing, if I wouldn't have done any reframing, I don't think I'd be sitting here right now in such good mental shape, because I wasn't able to. I would had been in psychoanalysis for like 12 years, probably longer.
What
And
is psychoanalysis? And so I apologize, I keep
no, 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 no,
interrupting
no.
you. So
These are good questions because people should know. Like I said, in psychoanalysis, your therapist, in my experience, is just basically a soundboard who says, yes, okay, well, okay, I see you're struggling, but you know, we could kind of peel the onion together, but there was no accountability. But more problematic for me, there was no treatment. Every time I meet with my trauma therapist, we do some form of treatment. So I can either process trauma or I can learn how to be safe in my body. The goal of trauma therapy is to learn to be safe in your body because you don't feel safe in your body, right? You just don't feel safe. So I've had to learn, and I'm a very patient therapist, thankfully, uh, how to be safe in my body because that was completely alien to me.
so let's, Rosalind, let's backtrack a little bit,
Sure.
and just get a little bit personal. Would you be comfortable sharing your story? What
Yes, Saima, have you read my LinkedIn feed? It's pretty obvious.
And I would like the audience to know as well, because we are streaming on Facebook and we are streaming on
Sure,
YouTube. So just
sure.
to give them awareness,
Mhm.
what you have gone through
Yeah.
and your journey and what you did to help yourself.
Okay. Well, I don't know how far back to start, but it's also important when telling my story to understand that generational trauma also plays a part in it. And I was exposed at a very young age to two very traumatized parents who were themselves very traumatized, and I probably had traumatized grandparents whom I know virtually nothing about, but there definitely was trauma. And what happens is that most trauma, especially we're talking in the 40s, 50s, and 60s at least, is not treated, right? And as we said in our comments before we came on air, trauma is more commonplace than people realize, unfortunately. And I don't know the numbers. I don't know how many people actually invest time and money in trauma treatment. In my particular city in Toronto, it's extremely affordable. We even have a place called Affordable Therapy, which covers all of Canada, and you can see a therapist for as little as $50 an hour, which is very important. So I was exposed to that, and I think also being the oldest daughter in the family, I was more exposed to the trauma, and other things like blending occurred. And also, what happens when you are forced to show up in your family bigger than your parents, take on parental responsibilities, trauma ensues. So I was kind of replicating what my mother did because she had to show up big in her family, and take care of her mother often and provide food for her siblings. I didn't have to provide food, but I had to provide some sort of, psychological safety. Unfortunately, in the process, I abandoned myself and wasn't able to meet my emotional needs. What kid can? Kids can't do that. And I didn't know about it probably for years, and then I developed an eating disorder as a result, and which was not that bad, but the more I repressed the trauma, the more it became an issue. And in 2019, I knew I had to change. I had to do things differently. I had to leave psychoanalysis, as I said, and move over to trauma treatment, and that was probably the best decision I ever made.
So, so you said that trauma can be generational trauma coming from perhaps so your genes carry this trauma through?
Oh, they do. I mean, at the very least, they're in your brain. If you look at studies of brain studies, people who scan brains, like there's a doctor in the U.S. I think it's Dr. Amen, and he has a book called "Your Brain Is Always Listening." And as part of his treatment, is he does brain scans and looks at people with trauma and people without trauma because your brain is different. So when you have trauma or anxiety, your brain is often in a constant state of alert, unresolved emotional pain, and things like that. So there are definite differences, and often things that I have little control over. I used to feel guilty. Why can't I do this? Why can't I stop this? Well, it's because of the trauma. The trauma does affect your brain, overstimulates your amygdala. And but there is hope. You can, as I said, if you reframe, if you process trauma, and if you're patient and loving with yourself, you can also rewire your brain. That is possible.
I do feel that I find the brain to be such a amazingly fascinating aspect of our body, because I think um, the brain can, it's not easy, but you are able to condition your and you have to be willing to do this. And if you are willing, then you're able to just recondition your brain into believing anything, into feeling anything. It's
Yeah,
not
but
easy.
Seema, I'm going to push back a bit. You see, and I push back quite a bit on the platform of LinkedIn because everybody is different. We're all individuals. We're very complex creatures.
Yes.
And you can be willing. I have been willing for 2 years to do, and I've done a lot of great work. I mean, I probably forget how I was when I started. But some of us have parts. Remember, I'm close to 56 years old. So I have to work a lot harder to bring about those results, right?
Because there's just so many layers and layers and years and
So
years.
it's not so much the layers, it's the depth. You see, when you do, there's a theory, a practice called parts work. When you do parts work, it means you're talking to different parts of different emotional experiences and where they land in your body. And you have, and then and there's a shield on those parts called protectors, and they are so resistant. So I now, for example, have been in the process of interacting with these protectors, and it's extremely hard for them to win their trust because so much of trauma also is a lack of trust in in people, because again you're going back to a place in time, a prolonged exposure, right, to maybe a abuse of some kind. And and remember, and these are old parts, they've been there for a long time, and they think the minute you want to dialogue with them, oh, she's trying to get rid of me, she's trying to kill me, right? When in therapy we just want to change their role in your body, in your brain. That's all we want to do. But it sounds easy on paper, it is not. So what happens a lot on LinkedIn and other places is that they go, oh, come on, here's this list, you can just do it, you can change your brain, there's neuroplasticity. Sorry, no. I can be willing, but sometimes it is extremely hard. And there are things, as I said, that I have no control over, certain impulses, because of old trauma.
So, do you feel, Roslyn, that something in your childhood could have, because mental health is
It's not something. It was ongoing. I grew up. My art. I had a piece of art. I was in an art show last week in Toronto, and it's called "The Madman in the House Was My Father." I grew up an extremely fearful, terrifying father figure, and who was, I guess now people would probably call him narcissistic. That's the word. Just completely uncaring how he treated us, and then I had enough when I was 23, and then I did not speak to my father for the last 20 years of his life. I did not go see him when he died because I had to protect myself. My father was a very dangerous person. Okay, with no boundaries, you know, and he was traumatized himself, but chose either consciously or unconsciously to make everybody else pay, including his wife and children.
because mental health is it's such a difficult subject. I'm so glad that it's getting more awareness right now.
Me
But
too.
for the longest time the concept did not exist. The only thing that you would see regarding mental health was in movies where someone is acting crazy and is in a mental institute, and then you're referring to that person as being crazy.
Yep.
So the few things that images which existed, they were just such a negative connotation, and
Well,
that's
they still do. They still do. Because I'm part of the Stability Network in Seattle, Washington, and one of the things we talked about at our last meeting before the break now is there are people still dealing with stigma. I'm very fortunate. My part of my healing process has really helped me divest myself of stigma, which is why I wrote my first personal trauma informed post on LinkedIn in February. For me, it was a watershed moment. I wrote it because another brave woman, oh, I forget her name. Um, she, she stunned me because she was hospitalized. She was bipolar and she was suicidal. So her post gave me the courage to share what I was dealing with for a big chunk of my life, and And since then I've been sharing honestly, painfully honestly, on the platform the ups and downs of healing, because there's a myth that people who are in therapy are weak people. We are not weak people. In fact, we're often the strongest people in the family, because we've got the courage to look at all of this stuff and say, it's awful, but I got to think of myself and I want to heal.
Absolutely, and that's kind of something that I've even in my niche community, in the Southeast Asian community, you know, mental health issues are even worse because it's acceptance,
Yeah.
understanding. There's just very little that exists in that capacity, and using this platform and using this tool, um, I'm trying to create more awareness. And so I do have a radio show here in Dallas as well. That I have a 2 hour show which I do on Thursdays, and that is something, I'm quite bold, and I just express what I feel, what I learn. I put it out there. So I'm doing the same thing on that radio show as well,
Mhm.
telling people that it's okay to go for therapy. It's okay to send your children for therapy. Don't suffer. It's okay to accept it. You know, um, it's just it's a difficult battle.
No, but that's commendable. The more people do it in every community, the better everybody is. Because when you encourage someone to go into therapy, and and if you do it for yourself, you not only benefit yourself, your family benefits. Okay, not in every case, but let's say in general, your family benefits, your workplace benefits, healthcare costs go down. Many people get sick because they don't deal with trauma and other mental health issues. I mean, the all this pain, it has to go somewhere, and often ends up in the form of chronic disease.
Yeah, because
Right.
that it has to go somewhere, right? Anything that
Exactly.
goes inside mind, body, and soul, it
Yeah.
needs to be in sync. And if it's not in sync, it's going to try to find some place it's
Not try to, it will. you
will,
know,
right?
it comes out in the form. A lot of people like to offload. For example, they'll yell at the cashier. They'll yell at the customer service person, when you're waiting for their visa stuff, whatever. And once you understand that your mental health, like your other health, is your responsibility, and nobody has a right to take out their anger or aggression on other people. You have no rights.
And
You know,
I myself am the first person to admit that I actually have done that, and I've done that. I think we do that with our children
mm,
because they're the most vulnerable. And when you're looking for an outlet to take your frustration out, you start screaming at them, and
yeah.
that's just completely wrong.
It is. It is. But living, at least you admit it. And I had to reflect back to my past behavior, and realize, no, I am not going to attack anybody. I'm not here to quote unquote own anybody, and I'm just here to share what I've learned in the last 2 years to the best of my ability, but also to show people how hard it is. I mean, and that's why I get really tired by people saying, here are 4 things. Don't let anybody dominate you. I mean, come on. It's the end of 2021. That's enough already with these kind of simplistic, slogans you see all over LinkedIn. And I mean, or, like, or be happy all the time. I mean, you're telling people it's normal to feel sad. It is normal to be angry. Okay, but those they're nothing. There's nothing negative about them, and yet you still have people telling others being angry is bad. It's stupid. It's useless. No, it's not. It's a normal reaction to abuse, and as long as you don't punch a wall and hit another person or hurt yourself, you can process the anger in a healthy way. You need to do it.
I mean, all these emotions are part of our existence. All these emotions, they exist within us.
Yep.
So now the question is, anger, jealousy, envy, whatever all these negative emotions are, um,
No,
just
same. They're not negative. They're just human. I'm
they're just
telling you
human
right now.
emotions. So how to
You,
channel them,
if you
right?
know about Jung's concept of the shadow, those are kind of all the icky traits and emotions that people don't like. Oh, if I'm envious, I'm a bad person. No, you're not. It just makes you human.
So we
So,
just have to figure out how to channel them.
well, number one, the best thing is embrace them first. Embrace them. And if you are envious and jealous, it's best to get curious, as my therapist says. Don't ask why. Don't say I'm a bad person. It's more productive to say, well, why am I jealous? Well, maybe you're jealous because other people around you are moving forward, creating some success, and you're not. I mean, that was the case in my life. I was envious of everybody, and I thought to myself, well, why? Well, because you're so fearful to the point where you're not moving forward. Of course, you're angry, resentful, but you have to do something about it, and stop and support people and see what's possible and not hate them. Hate them as much. So
Absolutely. And you know, love is a very powerful emotion. Um, and I think, love and validation, I think everyone wants to feel validated, right? With all these emotions that we have within us, even like you just said, whether it's anger or jealousy or envy, or if you're resentful.
yeah.
I mean, you want even these emotions to find a place for you to feel valid, that it's okay for you to be experiencing these emotions.
Yes, but let's get. But getting back to love, the love has to come from you, and for people with trauma, this, especially in my experience, is extremely hard to love yourself because you get this idea. Well, if I'm being rejected by my primary caregiver, you create this message, this story. Well, I'm not lovable. I'm not lovable is one of the most common, unfortunate stories that children tell themselves from a very young age. And for many people, it just doesn't, it never gets resolved. It doesn't get reframed. It doesn't go away. And it's something I know I have to consistently work at in order to nurture the inner love, especially when you're screwing up, when you're self sabotaging, when you're at your worst, you need to love yourself the most. And for me, that was extremely hard.
So where does that love, if so, I do understand that for each and every one of us, the love has to come from within us for ourselves.
Yes.
But I also feel that it has to come from, in order for you to start feeling it for yourself, you need to feel it from that energy from people around you. You know,
Yes, you
it
do.
could
Do
be your
say,
parents, they
but
could
see,
be
you
siblings.
do, but it has to come from you. If you did not receive unconditional love as a child, you have to create it, and you can create it through people like, oh god, what's that woman? Louise Hay. Teaches you. You learn how to nurture your inner child because your inner child has been carrying this burden of not feeling worthy, of saying, well, I must have been a bad kid. For years, I thought I must have been so terrible. That's why my father neglected me. That's why he abused me. I must have been a mistake. Yes. So, I mean, these
That's
are,
a huge burden to carry.
it
But
is,
often I also see that
yeah,
unconditional love. I see that it's very difficult for parents to give their children
of
unconditional
course it is because they didn't get it themselves. Of course it's difficult. I mean, if I had it my way, we'd be doing this stuff in kindergarten, just teaching people how to nurture self love, especially if you're not getting it at home, how to self regulate, how to sit quietly, how to connect with your body every day, how to not punish yourself, because how to not add to your suffering, right? I can do a whole hour on how don't add to your suffering, don't punish yourself. and don't think that you're a mistake. But like I said, it only works if you're aware of that. And even an awareness, as I said, is not enough. It's never enough because many people, in my case included, there's so much resistance, fear of change, fear of letting go of the familiar, right? Fear of letting go of the stories you created and held on to for, in my case, for like 40, 50 years. It's not easy. It's like trying to move a mountain sometimes.
So, how does change come?
What changed? Be more
In order
precise.
for you to uh, find that, build that self-love, how do you bring that change when you're resisting change? How do you um, train, how do you get rid of those habits you've held within your soul and within your psyche for decades?
Well, number one, you have to work with a therapist. You really have to learn with somebody who will will again offer you treatment. In some cases, my therapist, she writes scripts for me, things that I need to tell myself in the morning as part of a morning routine. I'll be honest, I'm not consistent, especially lately. December was a very hard month for me. I did have a bit of a setback, but the setbacks have to be penciled in. You are going to have setbacks. You are going to feel overwhelmed. Going into trauma therapy, especially once a week, because I have my appointments once a week, is extremely, what's the word for it? It's very hard. It's worthwhile, but it's extremely hard because you're going through stuff that you've been repressing for 40, 50 years. And you have to do the work between sessions. And even then, you also have to find ways just to sit with yourself, sit with one emotion at a time, and be committed to being kind to yourself. Which is why when I talk about when I was niching down on LinkedIn, I go, what's the one thing that I always tell people I work with? I want you to be kind to yourself. Because most people this year I've worked with, especially women, are not kind to themselves. Everything is wrong with them. They're doing everything wrong, and they have to be super women, and they're not allowed to make mistakes. And that's not true. So as long as you can treat yourself with grace, with kindness, all the good stuff you extend to others, extend it to yourself, you will do a lot better. And also don't feel pressure to quote unquote heal overnight or in 1 month. It ain't gonna happen. But what will happen is that if you make the effort and really show up in that 1 hour session, like I'm there, I haven't missed one session in 2 years. Not one. You show up, you do the work, you sit with that emotion, you process that trauma, you reframe that trauma, you become a lot lighter. You can feel it in your body, and the wound, which when you first start is so painful, becomes less and less painful as you continue in treatment. But as I said, you have to want to do it because it's not easy at all, but and it's a long journey, but it's definitely worthwhile. But you need to be okay with, as I said, being angry, frustrated, having breakthroughs, going back a bit, but knowing that each little bit of healing moves you forward, and a little bit of healing is better than no healing.
And
Because
like you said, it's so important, to it's so important to discover yourself, and in order to discover yourself, you need help, and that
no,
help
no,
comes in.
Seema, I'm going to push back. It's not about discovering yourself. This language is very dated and it's too general. This is about connecting. Trauma therapy is about connecting with yourself, with your inner children, with the wounds of the past. It's about connecting with your body. It is about trying to cultivate safety in your body. Because one of my automatic negative thoughts, thank you, Dr. Ellen, is It's like it's there's like software running in your head. It's there in the background. When you have trauma, even if you have negative thoughts, most of us do, the software is running in the background. So you, in the morning, if you can, you need to interrupt that software. And now you can either not listen to it, that's one way, as in the untethered soul method, or you say, okay, you think that, you know what? I choose to think differently. I choose to let go. What I didn't know before trauma treatment is that I had a choice. I had a choice to think differently. Two, I didn't know that I'm not my thoughts. I just experienced them. So there's a great therapist online in Utah, Emma McAdam. She says, I noticed that I'm
What's her
having
name? Roslyn again?
Emma McAdam, EMMA, and MC Adam. She's great. If you can't afford therapy, go to Emma McAdam. Even if you can, go to. She covers everything. So she says you have to understand you are not your thoughts, but what you can do is say, I'm noticing that I'm having the following thought, and that for me works. It gets me, it detaches me from that negative thought very quickly, right? And I don't, and people, and I tell people I work with, do not say I am sad. No, it's I feel sad. I am noticing that I am feeling sad. That linguistic switch is so important because it separates you from those feelings and emotions. You are not your feelings, thoughts, or emotions. You just experience them. And they not, you can have thoughts, but it doesn't make them real. So for me, that's one of the greatest lessons of trauma therapy. And that is huge, extremely beneficial.
So I think the most important thing is to 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 get help and to find yourself a good therapist who's able to guide you in the best possible way.
Yes, but she or he has to be trauma informed. That's not negotiable. In my experience, psychotherapy is not equipped to treat people with trauma. They just don't have the approaches. Just don't have them.
So, in your journey, in your journey, Rosalind, what happened where you felt that something is not right and I need to bring a drastic change so I can start connecting to myself?
It was, when you have those catastrophizing thoughts. My anxiety, year before 2019 was just out of control. I felt bullied by my thoughts, like many people do, and I wasn't aware that that was anxiety. I thought, man, I'm so messed up. My brain really hates me. And it turns out my brain is like many other people's brains. It's just that I didn't know that those thoughts are not me. Those are just automatic negative thoughts that can be challenged, and they're not directives. They're just information. They're just there in the background. Like I said, they run like software. So the moment I learned that, I was prepared to go into trauma therapy. That probably was a really big, important lesson for me.
So, so if people are experiencing extreme anxiety, is that an indication that you might have trauma? What's in it?
Possibly, but it's definitely an indication that you are not living in the present, that you're not living in the moment. When you are anxiety, you are living in your head. You're living in a future, a fearful, awful future that doesn't exist. So when I found myself doing that, when I learned how to help, I said, listen, sit down somewhere, breathe in, slowly, 1, 2, 3, exhale, 3, 4, 5. You can do breathing techniques, but basically your job is to self-regulate, become grounded in the present, and know that. I mean, so for example, am I safe right now? In most cases, yes, I am safe. Am I in danger? Yes or no? No, I'm not in danger. Right? It's those questions that what people need to ask themselves if they constantly catastrophize and fear the worst. But when you have anxiety, you are living in fear of the next moment. You're not actually being present in the current moment. You're robbing yourself of the present moment. So if you have anxiety, you also need tools that you can also get tools from trauma therapy as well, because they overlap. They're very similar. Yeah.
So I think it's very important to identify if you feel anxiety. It's very important to identify
Well,
it
people
when.
know. People know. If you have, in my case, I had a rapid heartbeat. My anxiety showed up in 2005 out of nowhere. I had a rapid heartbeat for a week. I thought, and most people do, they get their heart checked. So the anxiety, the rapid heartbeat isn't dangerous, but if you learn, if you can breathe and self-regulate, calm yourself, you can learn to slow down your heartbeat and get it back to normal heart rate. It's things like that. Yeah.
So just these different techniques to self-regulate,
That's
basically.
the first one. The first one is a few things. The first one, of course, is to sit somewhere. Don't fight it. Don't fight anxiety. Don't shame it. Just okay, anxiety. Okay, we're gonna have a seat over here. Okay, okay, I've got you. You know what do you need right now? Maybe let's just breathe. Get a glass of water. It also helps just to do something tactile. Go wash your hands in hot water. You know, I wash the dishes. Cook something with a lot of chopping, and that gets all that anxiety energy out, right? You need to move it through your body. But the first thing, first and foremost, is just to sit somewhere, don't fight it, try not to be upset. I know it's scary in the beginning, but go sit somewhere and breathe. And if you know, you can also make time. If you think you're going to have maybe an anxiety moment before your big talk, then give yourself an extra 15 minutes, right? In case it happens, okay, I'm going to stay longer in the washroom. I'll put my lipstick on later. I'll put the makeup on once, I stop sweating. And then be prepared. But most of all, just don't be ashamed and don't shame yourself and don't get angry at anxiety. Anxiety means well. It's just malfunctioning. That's all. It's just it wants to protect you, but unfortunately, it takes you away from the present moment, which most of us are fine in the present moment. Yeah.
So, Rosalind, people who are suffering from anxiety, and then it does lead to depression as well, because
Not
when
necessarily. No, no,
not
no. You can't.
necessarily.
No, no, no. Anxiety people. I mean, are generally worried about the future. People with depression are pretty much,
Living in the past.
past. Yes. So I don't know if there's a connection or correlation. I've only had experience mostly with anxiety and then trauma. Yeah.
Okay. So, what would you like to tell people who experience extreme anxiety?
Just like I said, I want you to talk to a professional. If you can't talk to an anxiety specialist, talk to a trauma therapist, and also just start to connect with your body. If you can, do some laps, walk around your unit, your condo, even just for 10 minutes. Take a hot and cold shower. There's different ways to do it, but also, I know it's not easy, but just go with the flow. When the anxiety's there, don't go, oh darn. I used to go, oh my God, this is terrible. But once I learned that I could self regulate, I didn't fear it anymore. That was huge. Once you learn how to engage with anxiety, the fear of anxiety will, in my case anyway, will dissipate. It's like a miracle. It's pretty good. Yeah.
Well, Rosalind, I do appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your journey and your experience and how the impact trauma had on your life.
Oh, sorry,
And
one thing, and see one thing, and also it helps to write. So move your body, but also write your feelings down. It's another way to get out the anxiety. Write them
You
down.
detach your emotions, right? You put them on paper. So if you shifted them from
Yes, because you really need to. People call it a brain dump, or it's the morning pages. If you do the book The Artist's Way, which I highly recommend,
which
it's
book is that?
The Artist Way by Julia Cameron. It's the reason I returned to painting in 2015. It's a very important book. She's still alive, actually. The Artist Way. It's about this spiritual healing properties of creating art. It's a wonderful, wonderful book by Julia Cameron. Yes. So again, use the art. So for me, painting, I paint almost every night, and it relaxes me. There's different ways to do it. So find a creative outlet, write about it, uh, immerse yourself in water, focus on slowing down your breathing, but most of all, be nice to yourself, and you make sure you touch your body. Like hand on your heart is extremely important if you have anxiety and trauma, to put one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly.
One hand on your heart and
Heart
one on your
on
belly.
your belly, close your eyes if you can, and you inhale, you breathe, and then exhale very slowly, and you try and sit there for 3 to 5 minutes. This, for me, is instantly calming.
Okay.
Yeah, there's all things people can do, and now in the age of YouTube, there's so many great free resources. Do Emma McAdams, 30 lesson course. There, it's free, right? It's on YouTube. You can't go wrong. There's so many great resources and great therapists and practitioners who really help you. Yeah.
What was that? Emma McAdams,
Yeah, she
30.
has all these free courses on. If you follow her YouTube channel,
Mhm.
she has a 30-unit course. It's free on healthy emotional processing, and she delves deeply into anxiety and trauma.
Okay.
Yeah, all free.
Well, hopefully we can, we can bring change and we can help people and we can touch some lives and especially, uh, such a strong believer that the day and age that we currently live in, um, everything that you need is on the internet. Every tool is there, every free resource, including education,
Yep,
is there. And people pay so much, especially in third world countries and in the vast majority of the world where people, children, don't have access to education. I
yep.
It's all free, it's all there, everything is on the internet. You
That's
need a
right.
computer, you need internet, and you're able to change your own destiny.
Okay, let's hopefully yes. If you but you have to actually want to do it.
You have
Okay,
to.
there. That's why there's unfortunately more resistance, and when people resist change because they're very very fearful in different layers of fear, unfortunately, not only do they suffer, but people they are connected to also suffer. So it's in your best interest to pluck up the courage and start to heal, especially if you're a parent, because you want that trauma to end at your generation. You do not want to pass it down. Trust me, you don't want to pass it down.
Absolutely. So that was so amazing. You want to find a way to heal because you don't want to pass trauma down.
Oh, and if you did, you got to learn to forgive yourself. You probably did, so please forgive yourself. And then, if you can, you can apologize to your kids as well. It'll be a very good moment for everybody.
And honestly, I do that. I do that frequently. I
Wow.
just My last guest who was here, she taught me something. She said, if you love someone, there are four things you need to do. You need to constantly tell the people that you love them. You
Mm,
need to thank them for being in your life. You need to
yes.
say sorry for anything that you might have done to hurt them, and
Yep.
you need to let them know that they are enough.
Yeah.
And since he taught me that, I've been doing that with my children. And you know, I mean, we are human beings, we are imperfect, we make mistakes.
Yes.
And, you know, self reflection, self realization, and the realization that you are imperfect and you make mistakes.
Exactly.
Um,
We're all imperfect, and your healing journey is going to be imperfect. Okay.
Absolutely.
But once you accept that, you're good to go.
Well, on that note, Roslyn, I do appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Saima. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to remove you from the stream and just end the show. So thank you for being here. So folks, thank you for being here, and uh, you know, for taking the time out, and you listen to my podcast, and you send me messages, and I appreciate that. So, if the show inspires you to take the next step in your journey, then I want to invite you to join my email list at vip@simadillon.com. And of course, if you feel that the podcast can help someone, then let's help me change lives. Take 30 seconds to share the link to the podcast in a text or post it on social media, and I will be so grateful to you. So once again, thank you, and stay safe.